What I'm about to reveal to you will fundamentally challenge everything you've been taught about human civilization. For decades, mainstream archaeology has insisted that the Sumerians were simply the first advanced human society, emerging mysteriously in Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago with fully developed writing, mathematics, astronomy, and complex social structures. But what if I told you that mounting evidence suggests something far more extraordinary and disturbing? What if the Sumerians weren't entirely human at all? Today, we're rediving deep into forbidden archaeological territory to explore the shocking possibility that Earth's first advanced civilization was the result of genetic manipulation by beings the Sumerians themselves called the Anunnaki, literally meaning those who came from the sky. This isn't just another ancient alien theory. We're going to examine actual ancient texts, archaeological evidence, and cross-cultural parallels that paint a picture so controversial, so paradigm-shattering, that it's been systematically suppressed by mainstream academia for over a century. We'll explore how Sumerian gods match descriptions of fallen angels across multiple ancient cultures, why Nazi ideology traced its roots back to ancient Aryan-Sumerian conflicts, and how recently discovered texts like the Book of Giants provide missing pieces to humanity's true origin story. But I must warn you, once you see this evidence, once you understand the connections, you can never look at human history the same way again. So if you're comfortable with conventional historical narratives, if you prefer the safety of mainstream explanations, you might want to stop watching now. For everyone else who's ready to confront the possibility that everything we've been told about our origins is a carefully constructed lie, let's begin this journey into the forbidden history of human civilization. Let's start with the fundamental mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for generations. How did the Sumerians appear seemingly overnight with such advanced capabilities? Unlike other civilizations that show gradual development over millennia, the Sumerians burst onto the historical scene around 4000 BCE with fully formed systems of writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, agriculture, and urban planning. It's as if someone simply downloaded advanced civilization directly into human consciousness. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The Sumerians themselves never claimed to have developed these technologies independently. Instead, their own texts consistently attribute their knowledge to beings they called the Anunnaki, powerful entities, who descended from the heavens to establish civilization on Earth. Now, mainstream archaeology dismisses these accounts as mythology, primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. But what if we take the Sumerians at their word? What if these weren't metaphorical stories, but historical records of actual events? Consider this. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the black-headed people, description that becomes significant. When we examine their physical characteristics as depicted in their own art, these weren't typical representations of local Mesopotamian populations. Something was different about these people. Modern researchers like Michael Tellinger have proposed that the Sumerians may have originated from the Indus Valley region. It's possibly connected to what would later become the Aryan peoples of ancient India. This connection becomes crucial when we examine Hindu texts that describe remarkably similar beings and events. But here is what is truly shocking. The Sumerian tablets don't just describe the Anunnaki as gods to be worshipped. They describe them as physical beings who walked among humans, who taught them technology, established ruling dynasties, and most disturbing of all, who engaged in genetic experimentation with the human species. The implications are staggering. If these accounts are historical rather than mythological, then human civilization as we know it may be the product of extraterrestrial intervention. But it gets even more complex and disturbing than that. To understand who or what the Anunnaki really were, we need to examine the evidence systematically, starting with their own descriptions in Sumerian texts. The word Anunnaki literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. This isn't poetic language. It's a specific geographical designation. These beings consistently describe themselves as coming from another realm, another place, arriving on Earth with specific purposes and agendas. But here's where the evidence becomes truly compelling. When we compare Sumerian descriptions of the Anunnaki with other ancient texts from completely different cultures, we find remarkable parallels that suggest we're not dealing with independent mythological traditions, but shared memories of actual historical events. The Hebrew Bible describes the Nephilim, the giants who were the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text, provides detailed accounts of the Watchers or Grigori, fallen angels who descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge to humans, and interbred with human women to produce a race of giants. Hindu texts describe the Devas and Asuras, cosmic beings engaged in ongoing warfare, with some factions teaching advanced knowledge to humans, while others sought to destroy or corrupt human civilization. Greek mythology speaks of the titans and gods who intermingled with humans, producing heroic but often problematic offspring. The pattern is consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other: powerful non-human beings descending from the sky, interacting with primitive humans, transferring advanced knowledge, and creating hybrid offspring that caused massive problems for human civilization. Now, here is the crucial point that mainstream archaeology refuses to address. If these were simply mythological stories created independently by different cultures, why are the details so remarkably consistent? Why do we find the same narrative structure, the same types of beings, the same consequences, across civilizations separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years? The more logical explanation is that these texts are cultural memories of actual historical events, preserved in the religious and mythological traditions of various peoples, who witnessed or inherited knowledge of these extraordinary occurrences. But the evidence goes beyond just textual parallels. Archaeological findings consistently reveal anomalies that mainstream science struggles to explain. Massive stone structures requiring technology we supposedly didn't possess. Depictions of flying vehicles and advanced weaponry, skeletal remains of unusually large humans, and artistic representations of beings that don't match any known human populations. Now we come to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire narrative: the evidence for ancient genetic manipulation. Sumerian texts, particularly those found in the library of Ashurbanipal, contain detailed accounts of the Anunnaki, creating or modifying human beings for specific purposes. The god Enki, described as Lord of the Abzu, is specifically credited with genetic experimentation involving humans and animals, but this isn't just Sumerian mythology. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers teaching humans the resolving of enchantments and the knowledge of the clouds. But it also describes something far more sinister: the creation of hybrid beings through unnatural genetic combinations. Chapter 7 of Enoch states, "And the women conceived and gave birth to giants." The giants consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh. This isn't describing natural reproduction. This is describing the creation of beings so genetically aberrant that they could unsustain themselves through normal means and became parasitic upon both human and animal populations. Hindu texts provide even more specific details. The Rig Veda describes conflicts between the Indras and the Daishas, but the language used suggests something far more significant than normal ethnic conflict. The text states, "Indra, the slayer of Vritra, the destroyer of cities, scattered the Dasyus sprang from a black womb." The phrase black womb in Sanskrit suggests artificial or unnatural birth, not simply ethnic designation. What's particularly disturbing is how these ancient accounts parallel modern concerns about genetic engineering and its potential consequences. The texts consistently describe the hybrid beings as problematic: too large, too aggressive, consuming excessive resources, and ultimately destructive to natural ecosystems. But here's where it gets truly shocking. Modern genetic research has revealed that human DNA contains sequences that appear to have been artificially inserted rather than naturally evolved. The sudden appearance of advanced cognitive abilities in Homo sapiens, the rapid development of complex language and abstract thinking, the dramatic increase in brain size, all of these evolutionary leaps occurred far too quickly to be explained by natural selection alone. Could it be that ancient texts describing genetic manipulation aren't mythology, but historical records of actual scientific experiments conducted by advanced beings thousands of years ago? This brings us to one of the most disturbing aspects of this entire narrative: how ancient genetic conflicts have influenced modern ideological movements, particularly the Nazi obsession with Aryan supremacy. The Hindu Rig Veda contains explicit descriptions of warfare between different genetic lineages, with the Indras in conflict with the Deises. But this wasn't simply ethnic warfare. The texts describe it as a cosmic battle between different orders of beings. The Sanskrit word Arya appears to derive from a combination, meaning those who came from the sky, a designation remarkably similar to the Sumerian Anunnaki. This suggests that what we call Aryan peoples may have been descendants of the same genetic manipulation programs described in Mesopotamian texts. But here's where the historical implications become truly disturbing. Nazi ideologists, particularly those involved in the Ahnenerbe, were deeply influenced by these ancient texts. They interpreted the Rig Veda's descriptions of Aryan-Sumerian conflicts as evidence for racial superiority based on extraterrestrial genetics. Heinrich Himmler and other Nazi leaders believed they were continuing an ancient cosmic war, attempting to preserve what they saw as a superior genetic lineage descended from the Anunnaki or similar beings. This wasn't simply political rhetoric. They genuinely believed they were fighting to preserve the alien-human hybrid bloodline. The terrifying irony is that if the ancient texts are accurate, both the Aryans and their opponents were products of the same genetic manipulation programs. The conflicts described weren't between pure and impure bloodlines, but between different experimental populations created by the same non-human entities. Modern genetic research has revealed that all human populations show evidence of relatively recent common ancestry, with genetic bottlenecks suggesting that our species went through severe population reductions in the relatively recent past. This aligns perfectly with ancient flood narratives describing the near extinction of human civilization, but it also suggests that racial supremacist ideologies are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human origins. If humans are indeed the product of ancient genetic manipulation, then all human populations are equally artificial in origin. The real question isn't which human group is superior, but whether any of us are fully human in the way we understand the term. The Hindu Vedic literature provides some of the most detailed and specific corroborating evidence for the genetic manipulation hypothesis, but it's been largely ignored by Western archaeology because of its religious context. The Rig Veda, composed over 3,000 years ago, contains descriptions that read more like scientific reports than religious mythology. It describes the Devas as possessing advanced technology, including flying vehicles, powerful weapons capable of destroying entire armies, and most significantly, the ability to manipulate life itself. But what's particularly compelling is how the Vedic texts describe the caste system not as a social construct, but as a genetic classification system based on different levels of divine human hybridization. The Brahmins were described as having the highest proportion of Deva genetics, while other castes represented different degrees of hybrid ancestry. This isn't metaphorical language. The Sanskrit terms used describe physical characteristics, genetic inheritance patterns, and specific capabilities that align more with modern genetics than ancient religious concepts. The Mahabharata describes wars fought with weapons that sound remarkably like modern nuclear or energy-based armaments. Cities are described as being destroyed in single blasts that leave the land uninhabitable for generations. Survivors are described with symptoms remarkably similar to radiation poisoning. But beyond the technology, the Hindu texts provide detailed genealogies tracing hybrid bloodlines through multiple generations. They describe how certain genetic traits were preserved, how hybrid vigor was maintained, and how genetic degradation occurred when the divine bloodlines became too diluted. What is particularly fascinating is how Hindu texts describe the gradual departure of the Devas from direct involvement in human affairs. This parallels Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki withdrawing from active governance, leaving behind hybrid human divine rulers to maintain their systems. The ancient Indian concept of yugas describes a gradual decline from a golden age when gods walked among men to the current age of darkness and ignorance. This isn't just spiritual metaphor. It describes the consequences of losing direct access to advanced non-human knowledge and technology. Modern India still shows evidence of this ancient genetic manipulation. The country has one of the highest rates of genetic disorders in the world, consistent with a population descended from experimental hybrid bloodlines. The prevalence of hybrid animal-human deities in Hindu iconography suggests cultural memory of actual genetic experimentation involving cross-species combinations. Now we come to perhaps the most significant event in this entire narrative, the global flood that appears in virtually every ancient culture historical records. Mainstream archaeology treats flood narratives as either localized events that were mythologically exaggerated, or as independent cultural responses to normal geological processes. But when we examine the details across cultures, the evidence suggests something far more coordinated and global in scope. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh describes Utnapishtim receiving advance warning of a coming flood from the god Ea, who instructs him to build a vessel and preserve specimens of all living things. The specifications given for the ark are precise and practical, not mythological. The Hebrew account of Noah provides additional details, including the specific reason for the flood, the corruption of human genetics. Through interbreeding between the sons of God and human women, producing the Nephilim giants who had corrupted the earth, Hindu texts describe similar global catastrophes, with advanced beings using their technology to preserve select populations, while allowing the corrupted masses to perish. But here's what's truly remarkable. Geological and archaeological evidence increasingly supports the reality of a global catastrophic flood occurring approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Rising sea levels, massive sediment deposits, the sudden extinction of numerous large mammal species, and the collapse of numerous advanced prehistoric civilizations all cluster around this time period. The question isn't whether a global flood occurred. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether it was a natural disaster or a deliberately engineered population reset. Consider the logistics. If you were an advanced extraterrestrial civilization that had been conducting genetic experiments on a planetary scale, and those experiments had produced dangerous and uncontrollable results, what would you do? You might decide to terminate the experiment, preserve the most promising specimens, and start over with a reduced and more manageable population. A global flood would be an efficient way to accomplish this, while making it appear like a natural disaster. The Book of Enoch provides disturbing details about the pre-flood world that support this interpretation. It describes an earth overrun with hybrid giants who were consuming all available resources, engaging in cannibalism, and threatening to destroy the planet's entire ecosystem. From this perspective, the flood wasn't divine punishment for human wickedness. It was environmental remediation to prevent ecological collapse, caused by out-of-control genetic experiments. It's the Book of Giants, fragments of which were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, provides crucial missing details about the pre-flood civilization and the beings that controlled it. Unlike the more familiar Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants focuses specifically on the hybrid offspring of the Watchers and their interactions with human civilization. What emerges is a picture of a world dominated by beings of enormous size and power who ruled over human populations as tyrants. The text describes Gilgamesh not as a legendary king, but as an actual giant, a hybrid offspring of supernatural beings who possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond normal humans. His statement, "I am a giant, and by the mighty strength of my arm and my own great strength, I can vanquish anyone mortal," is in boastful mythology. It's a factual description of genetic superiority. But what's most disturbing in these texts is the description of the giants' growing awareness that their civilization was doomed. They begin having prophetic dreams about a coming flood, and they desperately seek interpretation from Enoch, one of the few pure humans who maintained contact with the divine realm. The giants' dreams consistently feature the same imagery: a garden being destroyed by fire, trees being uprooted, and waters covering the earth. But their requests for intercession are denied. The contamination has gone too far. The genetic experiment has failed catastrophically. What's particularly chilling is the description of the giants' final days. They begin turning on each other, engaging in cannibalism, and desperately trying to extend their lives through increasingly desperate measures. The text suggests they knew they were genetically unsustainable, unable to reproduce successfully or maintain their population without constant intervention from their non-human progenitors. The Book of Giants also provides details about the classification of different giant lineages. It describes 3 distinct races: the giants, the Nephilim, and the Eliud, each with different characteristics and capabilities. This suggests a complex experimental program with multiple genetic variants being tested simultaneously. Most significantly, the text makes clear that these beings possessed advanced knowledge that they refused to share with pure humans. They hoarded technological and scientific information, using it to maintain their dominance over human populations. This pattern of genetic elites hoarding advanced knowledge while suppressing human development is remarkably consistent across multiple ancient sources, and it raises disturbing questions about whether similar dynamics continue to operate in modern times. So what does all this mean for us today? If the evidence we've examined is accurate, if human civilization really is the product of ancient genetic manipulation by non-human entities, then virtually everything we believe about our origins, our nature, and our future needs to be reconsidered. First, it means that the conflict between science and religion is based on a false premise. Both mainstream science and organized religion have been working from incomplete information. Science has ignored overwhelming textual evidence for non-human intervention in human development, while religion has mythologized what were actually historical accounts of genetic manipulation. Second, it suggests that human potential has been systematically suppressed. If we are indeed hybrid beings containing non-human genetic elements, then our capabilities may be far greater than we've been led to believe. The ancient texts consistently describe humans as having originally possessed abilities: longevity, telepathic communication, direct spiritual perception, that have been lost or suppressed over time. Third, it raises disturbing questions about ongoing manipulation. If non-human entities were involved in human development in the past, what's to prevent them from continuing that involvement today? Modern reports of UFO encounters, alien abductions, and genetic experiments might not be new phenomena, but continuations of ancient programs. Fourth, it explains the persistent presence of secret societies and occult organizations that claim to possess ancient knowledge. If certain bloodlines really do maintain genetic connections to non-human entities, then these groups might have access to capabilities and information that the general population lacks. But perhaps most importantly, it suggests that humanity stands at a crossroads. The ancient texts consistently describe cycles, periods of intervention followed by withdrawal, genetic enhancement followed by degradation, advanced civilization followed by collapse. We may be approaching another transition point. The rapid development of genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and space technology suggests that we're regaining capabilities that were lost after the last reset. The question is whether we use these capabilities wisely or repeat the mistakes that led to previous civilizational collapses. The evidence suggests that we have the potential to transcend our current limitations, but only if we understand our true origins and the forces that have shaped human development. The ancient texts are just historical curiosities. They re-warnings and re-warnings, and instruction manuals for a species that has forgotten its own nature. Whether we choose to remember who we really are, or continue living within the limited paradigms that have been constructed for us, may determine not just our individual futures, but the future of human civilization itself. The choice, as it has always been, is ours to make. But now, armed with this knowledge, we can make it as informed participants rather than unknowing subjects in someone else's experiment. The truth has always been hidden in plain sight, preserved in the ancient texts that we've been taught to dismiss as mythology. Now that you've seen the evidence, now that you understand the connections, the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? The ancient Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people for a reason. They knew they were different, knew they were the product of something extraordinary. The question is, do we have the courage to acknowledge what we really are?